He's the face of Hollywood's golden age. The man in the trench coat, a cigarette hanging from his lips, his eyes weary but resolute. He's Rick Blaine in Casablanca, sacrificing his own happiness for a cause greater than himself. He's Sam Spade in The Maltese Falcon, the cynical private eye who won't be played for a sap. And he's Philip Marlowe in The Big Sleep, navigating a corrupt world with a wry remark and a moral code all his own. He is Humphrey Bogart, the ultimate tough guy, the reluctant hero, the American icon whose on-screen persona defined cool for generations. We know the lines by heart. We recognize the silhouette in the fog. For nearly a century, the world has been in love with the legend of Bogart. He was the kind of man who could punch you out without a second thought, but who was also a sensitive soul, a guy who, around the right woman, wore his heart on his sleeve. His characters were complex, layered, and deeply human. They were men who had seen the worst of the world but still held on to a glimmer of decency. This is the Humphrey Bogart we all know and love, the one immortalized on film. But what if the tough guy on screen was just an act? What if, behind the trench coat and the cigarette smoke, there was a man consumed by a private life of alcoholism, chaos, and violence that Hollywood desperately tried to hide? What if the cool, confident hero who always had the right line was, in reality, a deeply insecure and tormented man whose relationships were a battlefield of emotional and physical abuse? This is the story of the other Humphrey Bogart, the one who lived not in the black and white morality of his films, but in the messy, violent, and often cruel gray areas of real life. This is the dark side of Humphrey Bogart that no one talks about. To understand Bogart's darkness, you first have to appreciate his light. Humphrey Bogart wasn't just an actor. He was a cultural phenomenon. In 1999, the American Film Institute named him the greatest male star of classic American cinema, and it's easy to see why. He basically invented a new kind of American anti-hero. Before Bogart, leading men were often dashing, handsome, and squeaky clean. Bogart was different. He wasn't classically handsome. His famous scar on his upper lip and a slight lisp, the origins of which are still debated, only added to his unconventional appeal. He brought a sense of world weariness and moral ambiguity to his roles that audiences found absolutely captivating. His rise to stardom wasn't overnight. For years, he was a contract player at Warner Bros., usually typecast as a gangster. He joked that in most of his early films, he was either electrocuted, shot, or hanged, but with The Petrified Forest. In 1936, where he reprised his stage role as the menacing Duke Manty, Hollywood started to see his potential. It was his co-star, Leslie Howard, who insisted on Bogart for the role, telling the studio, "No Bogart, no deal." That act of loyalty was a major turning point. Then came the 1940s, the decade that would forge his legend. High Sierra, in 1941, gave him a gangster with a soul, and later that year, The Maltese Falcon made him a true star. As Sam Spade, he was cynical, smart, and ultimately incorruptible. The film became a cornerstone of film noir, and Bogart became the blueprint for the hard-boiled detective. The peak of his fame arrived with Casablanca in 1942. As Rick Blaine, he was the picture of romanticized isolation, a man running from his past who rediscovers his idealism. The film earned him an Oscar nomination and cemented his status as a top Hollywood leading man. By the mid-40s, he was one of the highest-paid actors in the world, earning over $460,000 a year. The public couldn't get enough of him. He was the tough guy who got the girl, the cynic with a heart of gold. This persona was carefully curated, not just by the studio, but by Bogart himself. He was known for being a hard drinker, a man who scoffed at Hollywood's pretensions. The press often portrayed his public antics and combative nature as endearing quirks, part of his lovable incorrigibility. He reveled in his reputation as a man who was quick to anger and didn't suffer fools gladly. He once said, "What I have got is I have character in my face. It's taken an awful lot of late nights and drinking to put it there. When I go to work in a picture, I say, don't take the lines out of my face. Leave them there." This was the myth. The man on screen and the man in real life were one and the same. A tough, honest, hard-living guy who played by his own rules. But that myth was hiding a much darker reality. The man who seemed so in command on screen was, in his private life, often spiraling out of control. His legendary drinking wasn't just a charming quirk. It was a severe addiction that fueled his worst impulses. And his tough guy attitude wasn't just an act. It manifested as cruelty, paranoia, and at times shocking violence against those closest to him. While Hollywood sold the world the image of a hero, it was simultaneously covering up the story of a deeply troubled man. To understand where his demons came from, we have to go back to the very beginning, to a childhood that was anything but warm. Humphrey DeForest Bogart was born on Christmas Day, 1899, into a world of immense privilege. His father, Belmont DeForest Bogart, was a respected surgeon. His mother, Maud Humphrey, was a nationally renowned commercial illustrator whose work graced the covers of popular magazines. For a time, Maud actually earned more than her surgeon husband, a remarkable feat for a woman at the turn of the 20th century. The family lived in a fashionable New York City apartment and owned a sprawling summer estate. But this gilded cage was an emotionally cold one. By all accounts, Bogart's parents were formal, distant, and just not very affectionate. His father was absorbed in his work, and his mother, Maud, was an intense, career-driven woman who showed little warmth toward her children. Bogart later reflected on this emotional void, stating bluntly, "If, when I was grown up, I had sent my mother one of those Mother's Day telegrams, she would have returned the wire, 'To me, collect.'" This lack of affection had a profound impact on young Humphrey. He was often used as a model for his mother's illustrations. One drawing of him as a baby became the face of a national ad campaign for Mellon's baby food, making him a tiny, unwilling celebrity. He was teased as a boy for the frilly Little Lord Fauntleroy clothes she made him wear. This early exposure to a strange kind of fame, combined with the emotional neglect at home, seemed to foster a deep-seated resentment and a lifelong disdain for authority. He was sent to the finest schools, including the prestigious Phillips Academy in Andover, Massachusetts. But he was a poor and disinterested student, and his rebellious nature soon led to his expulsion for smoking, drinking, and bad grades. Rejecting the path laid out for him by his wealthy family, Bogart enlisted in the U.S. Navy during World War I. It was during his service that he sustained the injury that gave him his trademark scar on his upper lip. The stories vary. Some say it was shrapnel, others a fight while escorting a prisoner. Whatever the truth, the scar became a permanent part of his tough guy image. After the war, Bogart found his family's fortunes dwindling. His father had made poor investments and was deep in debt, a burden Bogart would eventually pay off. He drifted through various jobs before stumbling into acting, a profession his family looked down upon. But on stage, he found a place where his coiled intensity could actually be an asset. It was here that he began building the persona that would one day make him a star. Yet, the emotional wounds of his childhood never fully healed. He was a man filled with contradictions, born into wealth yet deeply insecure, intelligent yet dismissive of intellectualism, craving affection yet terrified of vulnerability. This inner turmoil seemed to create a need for conflict, a pattern that would come to define his personal relationships. He sought out drama, perhaps because it was the only emotional intensity he'd ever really known. His friendships were often built on hard drinking and sharp-witted insults, especially within his famous social circle, the original Rat Pack, which often met at his home for nights of legendary carousing. But it was in his marriages that this need for conflict would explode in its most destructive and violent form. Before Humphrey Bogart became one half of Hollywood's most celebrated romance with Lauren Bacall, he was a partner in one of its most notoriously toxic and violent marriages. His love life was a string of tumultuous relationships, but it was his third marriage to actress Mayo Methot that descended into a level of mutual abuse so extreme it became the stuff of dark Hollywood legend. Bogart's history with women was troubled from the start. His first two marriages, to actresses Helen Menken and Mary Phillips, were short-lived and ended in divorce, marked by accusations of neglect and disagreements over careers. He seemed to be searching for a relationship that could match the storm inside him. He finally found it in Mayo Methot. Methot was an actress he met in 1937. Like Bogart, she was a heavy drinker. When sober, she was described as lively and fun, but alcohol transformed her into someone paranoid and aggressive. They married in 1938, and for the next 7 years, their life together was a relentless cycle of drunken brawls, public screaming matches, and shocking physical violence. They quickly became known throughout Hollywood as the Battling Bogarts. Their home was nicknamed Sluggy Hollow, a twisted tribute to Methot's nickname, Sluggy, which she'd earned for her combativeness. The name was fitting. Their house was a literal battlefield. Friends and neighbors grew accustomed to romanticizing it as a form of passion. Their fights seemed to be a perverse way to generate the intense emotional connection that was otherwise absent from his life. Alcohol was the constant fuel for their fire. Both were chronic alcoholics, and their shared dependency created a feedback loop of paranoia and rage. When drunk, Bogart was described by those who knew him as objectionable, sneering, and snarling. Yet the Hollywood publicity machine spun this self-destruction into part of his charm, framing the Battling Bogarts as a quirky, passionate couple rather than victims of dangerous domestic abuse. Their fights became so disruptive that they were barred as a couple from several prominent nightclubs. The marriage finally reached a breaking point when Methot, in a state of despair exacerbated by her severe alcoholism and depression, attempted to take her own life. Even then, the cycle of violence and codependency was incredibly difficult to break. They separated and reconciled several times. The man who played heroes on screen was living a life that was anything but heroic. Locked in an abusive relationship, he seemed unwilling or perhaps unable to leave. It would take the arrival of a new, magnetic personality in his life to finally give him a way out. The firestorm of Humphrey Bogart's marriage to Mayo Methot finally began to subside in 1944 on the set of To Have and Have Not. It was there that he met Betty Persky, a 19-year-old model-turned-actress given the screen name Lauren Bacall. She was 25 years his junior, stunningly beautiful, and possessed a smoldering confidence that matched his own on-screen persona. The chemistry between them was immediate and undeniable. Bacall later recalled how nervous she was during their first scenes together. To keep her head from trembling, she kept her chin down and looked up at him with her eyes. This created the look, a signature move that was both sultry and guarded. Bogart, in turn, was captivated. He was patient and kind to her on set, and their on-camera connection quickly spilled over into real life. One evening, he stopped by her trailer to say goodnight, leaned in, and kissed her. An affair began that would change both of their lives. The affair was an open secret. Mayo Methot, still his wife, caught wind of it and would frequently show up on set, her presence a storm cloud hanging over the production. Bogart was torn. He was deeply enmeshed in the toxic cycle with Methot and returned to her several times. But the contrast between the violent chaos of his life with Methot and the thrilling new connection he felt with Bacall was too great. The fighting with Methot only intensified. Finally, in late 1944, Bogart moved out for good. He divorced Method in May 1945, and less than 2 weeks later, he married Lauren Bacall. To the public, this was the ultimate Hollywood love story. The hard-bitten, world-weary star had finally been tamed by a smart, tough, beautiful young woman. Their relationship seemed to be everything his marriage to Method was not, built on mutual respect, witty banter, and deep, genuine affection. They starred in 3 more films together, The Big Sleep, Dark Passage, and Key Largo, and had 2 children, settling into a life that appeared, on the surface, to be one of domestic bliss. But the demons that had plagued Bogart for decades didn't just vanish. He was still a heavy drinker, and his drinking remained a source of tension in their marriage. The nights of carousing didn't completely stop. While he may have found a partner who could handle him, his core personality hadn't fundamentally changed. He was still prone to dark moods and what one friend called a white-faced anger which cannot be appeased. There were also persistent rumors of infidelity, particularly with his longtime studio assistant, Verita Peterson. The marriage to Bacall was undoubtedly the great love of his life, a source of happiness and stability he had never known. But it wasn't a simple fairy tale. The old Bogart, the one forged in a cold childhood and tempered by years of alcoholism and conflict, was always there, just beneath the surface. Bacall provided a calming influence, a partnership that allowed him to do some of his best work, including his Oscar-winning performance in The African Queen. But she didn't cure him. The darkness was a fundamental part of who he was. Their marriage wasn't the end of his struggles. It was a long and mostly successful negotiation with them. She offered him a safe harbor, but the storm itself was always within him. Humphrey Bogart's life came to an end on January 14, 1957. He was only 57 years old. The cause of death was esophageal cancer, a tragic result of a lifetime of heavy smoking and drinking. Lauren Bacall was by his side until the very end. In death, as in life, the legend overshadowed the man. He was mourned as the great Hollywood icon, the tough guy hero of the silver screen. So what is the true legacy of Humphrey Bogart? It's one of profound and unsettling contradiction. There are 2 Bogarts, and it's impossible to understand one without acknowledging the other. There is the cinematic legend, the actor who created some of the most indelible characters in film history, the man who defined an archetype of American masculinity that was cool, cynical, yet fundamentally decent. His performances are timeless, masterful examples of screen acting. Then there is the other Bogart, the man behind the mask. This Bogart was a product of his own pain, a child of emotional neglect who grew into a man fueled by insecurity and a desperate need for conflict. He was a chronic alcoholic whose addiction left a trail of destruction. He was a participant in a deeply disturbing cycle of domestic violence, a man whose most intimate relationships were battlegrounds. This is the Bogart that the Hollywood myth-making machine worked so hard to conceal. The most uncomfortable question is this: could one Bogart have existed without the other? Was the darkness somehow essential to the art? It's a thought that challenges our desire for simple heroes. Perhaps the authenticity that audiences saw on screen, the world-weariness in his eyes, the genuine sense of pain in his characters, was drawn from a very real and very dark place. Perhaps he was able to portray men wrestling with their demons so convincingly because he was locked in a lifelong battle with his own. To remember Humphrey Bogart is to accept this complexity. It is to admire the artist while refusing to romanticize the abuser. It is to appreciate the icon while acknowledging the deeply flawed human being. His life is a stark reminder that the images projected onto the silver screen are often just that, images. Behind the carefully constructed personas of our greatest stars often lie stories of pain, struggle, and darkness. Humphrey Bogart was not the hero he played in the movies. He was something far more complicated, more troubling, and ultimately more human. If you found this look behind the curtain of Hollywood's golden age compelling, be sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you don't miss our next video, and let us know in the comments. Does knowing about Humphrey Bogart's dark side change how you see his iconic films? We'd love to hear your thoughts. Thanks for watching.